For today's reflection, I would like to, if I may, quote a priest by the name of Father Gregory Boyle. You've heard me mention him before, I think. He is a Jesuit that works with gangs and gang members in LA, and since the start of his ministry 30-some years ago, he's turned his ministry into the largest rehab and re-entry program for gang members in the entire world, and people have modeled what he's done. He calls it the model of what he does. He simply calls it kinship. Anyway, I'd like to quote him today briefly and then discuss an idea that I've mentioned before, which is receptivity. That in our lives as Christians, a receptive disposition is likely to bear witness more than a, quote, reactive disposition. He writes, "I've learned from giving thousands of talks that you never appeal to the conscience of your audience, but rather introduce them to their own goodness. I remember in my earliest days that I used to be so angry. In talks and op-ed pieces and radio interviews, I shook my fist a lot. My speeches would rail against indifference and how the young men and women I buried seemed to matter less in the world than other lives. I eventually learned that shaking one's fist at something doesn't change it. Only love gets fists to open. Only love leads to a conjuring of kinship within reach of the actual lives we live." Now, I don't know if I can speak for Father Boyle himself, but I'm going to take this train of thought and bring in a spiritual writer by the name of Martin Laird, who reflects on this disposition of receptivity. That when I go to prayer, I go receiving the Lord as he comes to me. I receive the gift of prayer, that God prays in me, so to speak, and this is purely receptive, that I receive God. Well, in light of that, then I go out into the world, and rather than reacting to the other, I receive the other. This is where peace and kinship and dialogue can begin to prosper again if we sort of let down our fists, as Gregory Boyle just mentioned in this quote, and begin to receive people where they are. I don't know Boyle that well, but based on his writings, I think he has a similar disposition. He receives these gang members. He receives these people who have had difficult lives, no matter how bad the things they have done. He receives them as opposed to reacting to them. We live in a world where people are by their very nature reactive, and they're reactive in so many ways: political, religious, social, organizational, whatever it is that we stand for. Our first tendency is to react. I would argue, based on Laird and based on Boyle, that as Christians, if we embrace a more receptive disposition, we'll begin to welcome people, and that's where the opportunity for conversion takes place. Before we get into any of the arguments or debates or anything like this, I long to receive you precisely as you are, because that's how I think Jesus Christ would approach you. And then through a prayer and all these things, this disposition becomes natural to us. We go out into the world longing to receive those we encounter, and they will take notice. Sometimes we have to put our fists down, as Boyle said, and quit shaking our fists and rather open our arms to receive those that we encounter on a daily basis. May God's love be with you all. I hope you are staying safe as this pandemic rolls on. I hope to run into you sometime soon. Peace.